and support. For any of you that are new, you are equally welcome. My name's Dave Pote. I'm actually the technical manager in the development team at Notting Hill Genesis. But for my sins, which are not worthy of mention, I've for a while been asked to chair this particular group. So again, welcome everybody. George and I have been kind of talking about some of the topics that we would like to go through today. And one thing that continues to vex me in my role at Notting Hill Genesis is kind of quality of handover documentation, understanding of Regulation 38 documentation. We continue to have kind of significant battles with our contracting colleagues about what is appropriate and what isn't. To be fair, that's not being disrespectful to the contractors, because actually I think where we're coming to is a place that as clients we maybe haven't defined clearly enough exactly what it is that we need in order to operate and maintain our buildings. So I can't place the fault entirely at their door, but it's a topic that continues to interest us and one that we're planning on kind of talking through today. We know that there's also a very hot topic around kind of the management of Gateway 2 processes, particularly. And I know some of us, and probably some of us gathered here, have had some challenges around that. We're not planning on talking about that in any detail at all today. But as always in these groups, if there are topics that you would like us to cover and like us to open up for discussion, then we're very happy to do that. So please don't be backwards in coming forwards with any things that you particularly would like to talk about today. So with that in mind, I know George, because George has always got slides. We always start these sessions with George talking to us about stuff. A very well-informed man that he is. So I know George has got some slides that he'd like to talk to us about to get the conversation going. I've then got some current thinking that I'd like to share with people, and really, just to get the party started, as they say. So with no further ado, George, can I hand over to you to present some stuff?
Yeah. So obviously we've got a group of people here that some of whom have seen what we're doing, and they've been involved and actually have been big contributors to it, and we've got some new people as well. So if you bear with me a little bit, I'll skip through a little bit of the background so that you can see the context in which we're working. One of the interesting things is that we've had some nice feedback from the government. This was last year, and then last week I had that from Tim Galloway, who's obviously is in quite a key role, and they're actively asking at the moment for industry feedback and industry responses. So I think collectively we're in a good position to provide that sort of feedback and perhaps simplify some of the issues. We've got this Miro board that the couple of the members set up last year. A Miro board is an online tool that allows you to make connections between different things. So you can create the relationships between things. And what the Miro board has been set up to do is for everybody's interpreting the legislation in different ways. So we've created this, and if you want to log into it, just put Miro board into the chat, and we'll send it to you. We've also got a recording from a couple of months ago, which Daz from David Miller's did, which was a really good overview of how the thing works. But the purpose of it is a live document. So as you come across things that are your interpretation of the way a certain maybe new bit of guidance comes out, it can go on there, then everybody else can see it as well. So it's a community effort. Overall, BIM4Housing, we've got the the different groups, and obviously this is the development group, but we've got an operations group, um, construction. A couple of the others we've not really driven forward because this has been going on for 4 years, and a lot of the construction group are now meeting. I think it's fair to say in the BIM and asset management group. But we've created some really useful resources over the period that everybody's got access to, including the things that the various different golden thread groups have pulled together as well. So one of the things that we're doing at the moment is setting up a golden thread task force, or we have done, where they're going to be focusing on even providing advice, giving, putting people together to create advice. But the important thing about that is the outputs that we produce. So we've got these on the website, you can download them, and it shows the detail of what experts say is needed for example, for smoke dampers or fire stopping or whatever. And the detail is quite significant. So this is the sort of thing that the regulator is going to want to see. What's a fire door doing? Why is it there? What information do we need about it? So we've come at it from the detailed end of things, but we've also got this sort of thing, which is this is a standardized way of doing fire door inspections. And we've had over 80 people get involved in this. These fire door inspections, you've got a type 1, which is the inspection of a new fire door, a type 2, which is a compliance statement, and then a type 3, which is, type 2 is existing fire doors, and type 3 is the ongoing maintenance. And then we've also, that call coming in has prevented me moving forward. Sorry about this. I'll just clear it. Apologies for that. No, I didn't like it either. Okay, that's working now. And we've now got one that's going to be for that we're just publishing for fire dampers, fire stopping, which if you're interested, you can get access to this.
George, Paul's just put his hand up. Paul, do you got something you got to ask George?
Yes, sorry, George. Is it worth differentiating between the inspections of communal fire doors and front entrance doors?
I think it does that in the guidance. It's an 80-page document. So, but yeah. So
Thank you.
Thanks, Paul.
not at all. And the whole point of this is to reduce risks of delays. So one of the challenges that we've come across is we've been doing audits on existing buildings just being handed over. This is one that we've been doing for another housing association. And you can see that although some of that key information has been delivered, this is not just Regulation 38. This is not, which is fire safety stuff. This is auditing against what's required for the Building Safety Act. And we're using this sort of methodology to systematically go and do audits. But that was the Regulation 38 information. And you can see there's quite a lot missing there. And that's been very useful. And in fact, the client was saying this to me in the meeting this morning, just afterwards, that this has been very useful because it's meant that they can go back to not just the main contractor, but go back to their subcontractors to get the information that's needed. And it's highlighting what's missing. But I don't think that this is so uncommon. The other thing that we're finding, this is another project where the handover documents are that, we've been asking for years for these to be in a machine readable format. The reason that's important is that here, for example, we've got a document that's in the handover information that's a PDF, which in itself, is a bit problematic because it means a human's got to read it and interpret it. But when we actually look at this, it's there, for example, it's saying that fire door there should be swapped out for a 60-minute fire door. Now, was it? Yeah, this should be, as handover information, it should be clear. And then also, if you've got a reference down here, what we believe is needed is for that to be referenced electronically to where it is in the floor plan. Otherwise, you're relying on whether you've read and interpreted that properly. So the reason I'm saying this is that the handover information itself, somebody might argue that they've provided it, but you can't consume it because it's not in a form that is checkable. And this is another example where we've got a PDF. Here you can see in this corner here, you see there's an exit sign there, but you can only just make it out because there's a hatching pattern over it because it's a reflective ceiling plan. Now, I'm sure if we had the DWG file, you'd be able to switch off the layer and maybe a PDF, but this is what was handed over. So these are the sorts of things that need auditing. So I'm going to jump out of here. What we're recommending is that we can have a very simple way of looking at this as a baseline to say these are the asset types that are mentioned in Regulation 38, and that a very basic thing, we ought to have a common way of describing a fire door or a cavity barrier or a AOV. If some people call it a smoke vent and some people call it an AOV and other people call it an automatic opening vent, it's extremely difficult to use any sort of technology to check things. Also, what we're saying is that we want some basic information. We want to know the individual asset ID because you need to know where that, if there's smoke detectors, you need to know that you've got 50 or 1,000 smoke detectors. You need to know where it is, which circuit it's on, the manufacturer's product reference and data sheets, who installed it, who commissioned it, who inspected it, got two of those, and who's maintained it. So what we're trying to do within our little group is put together a standard set of information that is just a baseline that can be used to check, so that when David's team are taking over a building, at least at this level, it becomes a litmus test or of whether the quality of information is there. And what we're finding is this information just isn't being handed over. That was it, really.
Great. Thanks, George. Before we has anyone got any questions for George? Any observations? And no is okay.
Just very quickly, George, just before you move on, we should be using codes, not just descriptions. So we agree a codification. So people can use different descriptions, but once you're into interoperability between systems, they share the code and you can have different descriptions, but the code would be a big benefit.
Absolutely, but the point is, if you have an asset type name, you can have a code behind it. The difficulty with codes, I mean, we use codes all the time, Brian. And we've got a master asset database that's got 3,500 asset types in it, and each one has got a standard taxonomy to work to. But if you're a normal person that you're not into, you're not knowledgeable about how taxonomy and codes work, you need to be able to find things easily. So therefore, if you're looking for a smoke detector, we think it's reasonable that you should be able to type in smoke detector and find something.
Yeah.
But you're absolutely right. The data key should be something that's properly machine readable.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, thanks, Brian. Chris, you put your hand up. You got to say something now.
Sorry, I had to unmute
no
myself.
choice.
I was, as ever, I sort of look at the spreadsheets which and the information which is presented, and although we talk a lot about how you can get the errors flagged, at some point the information will be handed over, and can that information or that data in detail be actually accepted by the client's systems? Because a lot of it's doing checks up front, but then knowing what gets filtered through to actual operational systems, so that they can actually use it at the point they're starting to use a building would also be helpful. But it's almost a lot of talking about the data, but not how it will get consumed. And if you know how it will get consumed, that will probably drive things to become more machine readable, because then it's like, oh, we've got it, we can use it. So
that's a very good point, Chris. We need more automation in the process, and this is what George is alluding to. If we can get machine readable data, not just static PDFs, then we can look at solutions where we can consume that data into operational systems like asset management systems. That's certainly
the thing was, what would be the chicken and egg? So it's from that comment, it would just be, oh, if it is machine readable, then we'll look at solutions how to feed it in, as opposed you could base your information requirements around saying we have got these information requirements and it will go into this system, in which case you're almost pushing it back to the contractor to provide it in that format.
Yeah,
well, that's the ISO, is it not? That's what you're supposed to do. Start with the end in mind.
Certainly, yeah. So if I just show one other thing that it reinforces what Chris has just said there. We've got in our sort of community, we've got lots of standards that we're working with, and they're all extremely helpful. But the challenge is anybody checking them? So this is an old slide. This is, but I think it's still very relevant. This is the old BIM task force process, and the important thing here is that you've got what are called exchange points, or Kobe drops is another term for them, at different stages through the process. And what you're then doing is you're identifying what's needed at each stage, and it's being checked and validated at each stage. And if the information that was required hasn't been provided, it should get sent back. So that feeds into what Chris and Brian have just been saying there, that it needs to be machine readable. What we are currently doing is people are trying to do it all manually. And if it's document based and people are doing it manually, there's going to be mistakes, and we just can't afford that. So if we look at the golden thread, what we're supposed to be doing is having it so that the building is considered to be a whole system, and therefore everything's working together. And we therefore need to be able to have a situation where a particular risk, let's say a fire breakout in a kitchen, we've got smoke getting into that stairwell there. How can we prevent that from happening? And we need information. We need to make sure that all of the assets that go to make up that compartment wall are ready, are fit for purpose. So just having, for example, a really good fire door inspection, and we've got great fire doors, will be useless if the penetration seals don't work. And you've then got other systems that kick in if the compartmentation fails. So what we need to do is make sure that we've got interoperable information, which is, I think, what Brian was saying earlier. Here, for example, we've got a door. That door can be referenced properly if we've used the right taxonomy and classification, so that in the BIM model, you can pick up the detailed information about what's missing from that particular door. So if David sets up to say that he wants to know the declaration of performance of that door, it will automatically alert you when that declaration of performance isn't attached. And the declaration of performance is probably coming through from a product library. So the manufacturer's product data can then be kept up to date once and then accessed. But from a building safety point of view, you probably want to make sure that you know what spaces are being protected by that door. So therefore, we've got that relationship between the asset, the system it's part of, let's say compartmentation, and what spaces it's protecting. And then finally, you've then got a range of different software applications that are probably going to be used to do inspections, commissioning, and things like that. And they all need to be referencing back to that same door. And coming back to Regulation 38, this is legally what everybody should be being provided. So if, for example, you're struggling with contractors that aren't providing you with the right information, the Regulation 38 information, this is the legal requirement. And you as the client, as the developer, need to be confident that you've got the right information, because you've got to sign this declaration to say that you've got it all. I personally don't think anybody can sign that at the moment with the quality of information we're getting. And the contractor is equally liable, because they've got to sign a declaration to that effect as well. And my understanding is you don't get a certificate of completion unless this has been signed. Now, I know there's pushback on that, but that is the law. And the reason we need to know, for example, where some of these assets are, like fire dampers, we need to know where they are. So when they're inspected, we can make sure they've got, for example, a breakaway joint, so that if a fire takes place and it collapses that ductwork, it doesn't get pulled out the wall. Now, in many cases, contractors don't know where fire dampers are. So this is an example where there's a number of different software packages being used in this, but this is an example of the interoperability that Chris was just talking about earlier. And that is, we've got 5 different software applications. And in this particular case, they've used Revit. They've modeled in some detail the building services. They've put in where the fire dampers are. They've modeled them. We've then been able to use COBie to pick up where they are. So we've got a list of all the assets. It's connected into the product library, so you can see which fire damper was used, and also you can get a very simple plan of where that item is in the in the in the building, so you can see that particular fire damper, which wall it's in, and also we can then connect through to the 360 photo that that's been done through a schedule. So you can pick a particular item and it takes you to a 360 photo of where that is. This is really, really useful BIM stuff because you're not requiring people to finish the BIM models. And then we've got here a connection back to the documents. So those documents are tied back to the object. So it means that we don't have the disconnect between the O&M, the model, the schedules, and the inspections. And I think that's the sort of thing that we need to be moving towards, that also records where else that particular fire damper, which other projects that particular fire damper was used in.
George, just very briefly, what you've just shown us, was that constructed using just Kobe data?
Yes.
Right. Okay.
Yes.
So you've taken in a well-populated Kobe file, and obviously you can attach things like 3D images. You can retrospectively go out with your cameras and attach that and stuff.
Well, the answer to that is yes, Brian. So basically, the Kobe is the data schema.
Yeah.
It's been populated with data that has been properly classified and categorized. ActivePlan's got an application that complies with the Kobe data schema, but other people do that as well. Yeah. I mean, that's the whole point of it. And therefore, we can interoperate with the different applications using that data schema. So our integration with Revit, for example, is using that data set.
Yeah. And then what about Uniclass taxonomy? You've used that in there as well to get a uniform, if you like,
Absolutely,
description of the assets. Yeah.
Not just that, Brian. What we're now doing is we're using Uniclass to identify what the content is of a document, so that one of the frustrations that people have is that they'll open a document because all they've got is a file name. They've no idea what it is. So what you're able to do is to have the document classified using the PM table in Uniclass, so that if it's what type of certificate it is, rather than have it just as a term certificate that you've then got to open up and find out, because you can have thousands of certificates on a project. You can say, well, what certificate is that? So you can have those pre-classified as well. We're huge believers in classification.
Yeah, that gives you standardized metadata to search, find, and understand that document, even to a certain extent, even before you open it.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
How long? So I worked for Wheatley Housing up in Scotland. So I think some of the sections and legislations are a bit different. But anyway, that's a bit of a tangent. So you're talking about everything having its own classification and having the BIM objects from a library. How long did it take for those teams to build those objects? Because a lot of the stuff, particularly with your existing buildings, those objects don't actually exist, and they need to be modelled with all the information then filled in on the Revit family or their ArchiCAD family or whatever. So is that something that you've had to do? Or
no, we don't do that. Yeah, so nobody does that. You don't have to do it. So what you just talked about there is sort of it's the principle of actually creating 3D models in Revit, say, of or ArchiCAD of manufacturers' products. And I've been doing this for, well, too long, really, over 20 years, 30 years actually. And nobody in asset management uses the manufacturers' models. There's no need to do that. What we are doing is the product library that we've got is constantly being updated by projects. We've made it free, and the industry is populating it as they do projects. So we tend to pick it up at the point of technical submittal. So when a product is selected, the first thing that has to happen, you need to have a record of what you're installing anyway, don't you, Connor?
Yeah.
So at that point, whoever it is that's proposing that particular product puts it into the product library, and
Right.
it's then available for everybody to use.
So your model could just be a simple block extrusion that's linked to the product information. Yeah, perfect.
Yeah. So the connection is done in the database, and the connection to the model is via an API connection from the model. I think we may be going too technical, David, so pull me back.
So, firstly, thank you, George, for the content, and thanks for everyone that's kind of contributed to that conversation. I always feel very conflicted when I listen to George talk, because he paints a picture of the future that is very compelling, and one that absolutely, and I think, Connor, it may have been you, I can't remember, it might have been Chris, was talking about starting with the end in mind. And I think what George has painted there is a picture of probably where we're all aiming. The reason why I'm conflicted is, and everyone's going to be in a different place on that journey. But speaking personally, we are a very long way away from, or it feels like a very long way away from kind of creating a world that George has painted for us there. And the context of that for me, and I said it at the beginning, we're still battling with contractors to provide us with the most basic levels of information. And as George said, it's incumbent upon us as clients to be signing off on the information that we're being given and saying, yes, this is adequate for us to be able to manage a building. And frankly, we're not doing that. You know, as a client, we're not making those sorts of declarations because we can't, because we don't know that we've got all of the information that we need, you know, in order to manage buildings properly. And we'd love to be in that place, but I don't think we are. And even if we have the information, you know, we've got armies of people that are kind of trawling through those documents, consultants normally at huge cost to us in trying to check it out. And it's just not giving us the assurances that we need. Now, I'm talking very personally, and you know, I'm baring my chest there to the world a little bit, but I suspect all of us are in different places on that journey. So what I was going to lead into, and it's going to go very untech now. So for the tech-minded amongst you, brace yourselves to be dragged back into the dark ages of spreadsheets. But I've done a piece of work in response to, as George says, the need for us to be signing off on the information that we are receiving, and the fact that I don't think as clients we have defined well enough exactly what it is we're expecting from contractors, and without being disrespectful of contractors, generally speaking, they will find the path of least resistance, and they'll give you as little information as they think is absolutely necessary. And we're having very long debates about what constitutes Regulation 38 and what doesn't. So I just wanted to share with you very briefly some of my thoughts on what I think constitutes Regulation 38 stuff, and really open it up for people to contribute to. What I would caveat that with is this is very much a work in progress. I've shared it with nobody. You are the first recipients of this wonderful information. But what I've tried to do is I've tried to link together at a fairly high level the sort of information that we're expected to produce for the gateways. One of those pieces of information is something called a fire and emergency file, that there is some guidance around, but I've tried to add a little bit to that. And then I've tried to link that to the kind of Regulation 38 documentation as well. Now, I suspect all of you will be familiar with the stuff that's on this first page, because it's stuff that's required of us for the building control submissions at Gateway 2. So I won't dwell on that. But then when it comes to the fire and emergency file, yes, there is some guidance, and the guidance talks about fire strategy documents. And I've tried to add a bit of flesh on, well, okay, what does that mean? You know, what are the strategic documents that get produced? And again, most of that stuff will be fairly familiar to you. Just one particular one for us, you know, the introduction of electric vehicles into our car parks under our buildings poses a very particular risk. And so we are placing the onus on our design and build contractors to carry out specific risk assessments around that particular addition, and that generates a strategic document, you know, that to my mind needs to be included as a fire strategy document. The guidance talks about active and passive installed systems, but that doesn't give us any detail as to exactly what it is we should be putting in our files. So I've tried to elaborate on that, and I'll come to that in a minute. It asks for external wall information. And again, you know, lots of documents get generated around external walls. And again, I've tried to list them out there. Individual product fire rating details. Yeah, okay. So we need, and George alluded to this in terms of the library that Active Plan have developed. But I've tried to start to define here, well, okay, which are the specific products that we need test data and fire rating data around, and I've tried to list those out. We've had conversations with contractors about the relevance of BBA certification and where it's relevant and where it isn't. And again, we're trying to provide a bit more definition around that. Statutory certificates, building reg sign off, yeah, that's in the file. As-built drawings, yes, that's in the file. We never get as-built drawings, by the way. I don't know what your experience of dealing with contractors is, but you ask them for an as-built drawing, and it's like you're asking them for the world. You know, they're simply not prepared to produce a document that describes itself as-built. But that's a conversation for another day. For me, obviously, under the fire regs, we've got to populate PIB boxes with information. Well, as far as I'm concerned, that's fire and emergency file stuff. We produce pre-handover FRAs, we produce fire safety management plans, and we produce an awful lot of quality assurance records around fire and structural safety now, all of which needs, in my opinion, to find itself into the fire and emergency file that we then submit to the regulator at Gateway 3. So when it comes to the as-built drawings and these active and passive systems, that's when, for me, you start to get into the realms of the Regulation 38 requirement. And what I've produced here, and it's very much akin to what George has already shown you, is I've tried to list here what are all the pertinent building elements, what are all the permanent M&E systems relating to fire and structure, and what exactly is the information that we need from our contractors. So to start with, for each of those systems, we need their technical submittals. When it comes to the installation details, as George has alluded to, we need to know what the contact details are for who's installed it, what the competency of those installers were and what certification they hold, what conformity certificates there are in relation to the installation itself, commissioning and test certification, any insurance details. relating to that system, and any third-party acceptance accreditation associated with that. So this is very much document led. This isn't anywhere near what George has been talking about in terms of digital records and how that digital information connects. For me, this is about, before we get into that digital world, we've got to get the basics right, and we're just not yet getting the basics right. So this is about trying to set that out. When it comes to handover, I know this is high level summary. There's a bit more detail that I'll show you in a minute, but we need the O&M information, we need operation manuals, we need manufacturers literature, we need the warranty information, we need the as-built schematics and schedules. Now we all know this. This is pretty standard stuff. But frankly, we just don't get it. And what we as the client are not yet smart enough of doing is defining this in our contract. So this is what we get from our contractors. Just to delve into a little bit more detail, this is a piece of work that myself and one of my colleagues has done. Now this isn't just our work. We took some work that others had done. We work with a company called Zootech, that I'm sure many of you will be familiar with, and they've put together kind of schedules of documentation and folder structures that we've tried to take and we've tried to expand upon. As you'll see, each folder, each document type has its own singular reference number. So when it comes to, let's give you an example of certificates. In a smoke ventilation system, there are 3 folders for certificates: testing and commissioning, design and acceptance certificates, and then product declaration certificates. But each of those will have its own unique reference number. There is another level of detail that sits below this. So when we talk about testing and commissioning certificates, what are the specifics for smoke ventilation systems? What exactly is it that we need to see? So the reason for sharing this is that this is our first attempt at trying to add a significant amount of flesh on the bones, because when you read the Regulation 38 document itself, it creates really good breadth in terms of what its intent is and what the breadth of the expectation is, but it offers no depth whatsoever into the kind of data and the information that's expected when these systems are handed over. So this is, as I said, this is me bearing my chest here a little bit and saying, look, this is where we're at. We're just trying to get these basics right. And once we've got this right, then we can start to look at some of the digital solutions that George has shared with us. So that is all I wanted to share in the interests of sharing. It's a work in progress. It's going to go through many iterations, I am sure, before we get it absolutely right. But the message is, unless we ask our contractors specifically what it is that we need, we're not going to get it. And that's kind of where our thinking is. So I don't know if anyone's got any thoughts, any comments, anything they'd like to share. All comers are welcome. Could I just to start that off? Can I maybe, if people are prepared to share, kind of where are you at with this journey? Are many of you close to where George is, or are most of us still nearer to where I am and just trying to get the basics right? We can turn the recording off if you prefer.
To give you comfort, David, I think.
Thank you.
I think people are closer in our world to where you are. I agree. I think it's good to have an ultimate objective somewhere in the region of where George is, often on Mars or somewhere. But we need to deal with the here and now, and to be quite frank, we are struggling to get out of our contractors the basics.
Yeah.
And I've had lots of conversations, and I know colleagues on the call will back me up. Where we ask for documents, and when we ask for it, we really do want the structural information. It's not just regulation 38. Let's,
Yeah.
at least there we had a framework for the information that we need. We're
Yes.
starting from scratch really with structural, because it's not something that we ever focused on before. So that's another tricky area. So when we say we really want all the structural information, yes, we do include things like concrete crush test results. Yes, we want to know about the structural aspects of the cladding system, because that often gets forgotten. We focus on the fire safety aspect of cladding, but not the structural. And my word, when we've got an HRB with whatever cladding system on 50 meters tall, we ought to know about that structure.
Yeah. So one of the things and thanks, Edward, I appreciate you kind of chipping in with that. I mean, we've employed probably for a couple of years now what we call structural guardians. So we have structural guardians, we have fire guardians, we have clerk of works, we have M&E guardians, we have heat network guardians. So we've got an army of consultants that we employ at significant cost just to do the kind of quality assurance on our projects, and we get them to review the design, we get them to do site inspection, but actually at the end we also get them to review the documentation that we receive, and where there isn't any specific kind of guidance, if you like, the question that we ask them is this enough? Is this information of good enough quality that in your opinion would allow us to kind of manage the building going forwards? And we find that hugely beneficial, I have to say, but it comes at a cost. We have to employ consultants to do this stuff, but we do it simply because we're trying to drive a much better quality agenda, but it seems to work for us. Poncho, sorry, don't know if I got that right.
I did.
Hi.
Yeah, Pencho. I think we find it very, very useful and beneficial to cooperate with other teams in this process, specifically building safety team and also the operational team. So what we end up doing is we have our own internal process, and like you said, we have involved external consultants to peer review fire strategy, for example, but pre-contracts, for example, ERs. We are in the full control for our landlord schemes, not for Section 106 schemes.
Yeah, sure.
Well, but what we found very interesting is if we have that feedback from different, teams of where we can improve the areas that need improvement, we can actually set this in the ERs, in the contracts in the beginning, and then just policing that. So in regards to Regulation 38, I think the spreadsheet format might be actually the right, a better way of actually putting the information. But at the moment, we are doing it in a Word document. What we have done is we've gathered information at a certain stage. So we start very early on from design point of view. When we do site inspections as well, so we are basically policing the contractors where they have installed what they should have installed. And I'm just going to share my screen very quickly. George, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I just wanted to flag up that what I was doing in terms of showing what I did, that isn't a demonstration. Those were live jobs.
Yeah.
Right? So it was the reality, but
possible.
I was really doing it to respond to what Chris and Brian were saying earlier, because most of our projects, we're down at your level, David, in terms of managing documents. So because that's the quality of information that's being handed over. So what we're doing, I think we're doing Tower Hamlets at the moment. We've been working on that for 2 years, and they've got 78 HRBs.
Yeah.
So we're working with Ridge, the surveying firm, and we're creating spatial models for all 78 blocks, all of the floors, all of the spaces in every floor, and also all the fire critical assets. Now, the reason I'm saying that is that we're doing that in a very simple way. It's all being done in in a proper database, but it's being done in a progressive way so that you can start with simply identifying, where all the smoke vents are.
Yeah.
And then saying, okay, if we've got a smoke vent, do we need to record what the actuator is? Probably yes. Yeah. And therefore, do we then need to look at how we're doing, what software is being used to maybe do inspections or whatever? So what I'm saying is that we can start very low and then work up. What's really important, as Brian was saying earlier, is you get the coding and the taxonomy and the classification right.
Yes.
Because
Yes.
what you really want is all new information that's being collected, even on existing buildings. You want it being collected in a standardized way so that you can make it machine readable.
Yeah. No, agreed. Thanks for that, George. Before I ask Paul what he's going to say, I just want to say, in all the years you and me have been talking, you've never suggested you're down at my level. So I thank you for that. Paul.
Yes, it's in my ideal world, so I may be wrong. I think for the building, especially as the ones we've already got as built, is your priority is to have your fire strategy showing where everything is on the plans, and then using the BIM system, to George's system, for identifying everything within those, all the assets within that fire strategy.
Yeah.
Rather than sort of maybe go, what we've been using, we could have the advantage of going straight into the modern system, using all the correct data, etc.
Yeah.
And I think there is ideal world to have both systems running in conjunction with each other, and then when it's ready, go into the digital side of things.
Yeah.
But I think personally, I've been looking at this for some time. The sooner we can get that information and get it digitally, the better.
Yeah, no, I couldn't disagree with that. Thanks, Paul. Pencho, were you going to share something? Will the system not allow you to do it?
No. Let me just share it now.
Okay.
Like I said, cooperating with the building safety team, for example, give us a opportunity to request and ask for certain information. For example, this is the buildings, high-rise buildings in scope, and this is sort of information we are requesting. Let's say 10 weeks prior to completion. But yeah, all sorts of information. The only way, the only thing that I just want to mention is we use Word instead of Excel, is because we need to explain to contractors what is what. So basically, what is regulation 38? We also put abbreviations and some sorts of definitions of what is a fire door set, because sometimes we get into obviously discussions about what is what. But when you put that and use it in the ERs as an annex, I think it's quite clear that this is our expectations and this is what we should receive in terms of information. And so you're right, us built drawings and all the fire strategy versions of the fire strategy documents, including the us built fire strategy, should be provided. But yeah, in terms of the competency as well, it's CDM, Building Safety Act. Correct me if I'm wrong, but yeah, we need to know about the competency, and at the moment contractors are pushing back on providing any sort of competency except for fire doors and fire stopping. But yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because there's quite a lot of accreditation in place, isn't there, around fire doors, fire certificate, fire stopping. So kind of be it BM4Housing, FIRAS, those sorts of organizations. There's quite a lot of third party accreditation stuff. So you'd imagine that stuff's fairly readily available for other systems. Maybe not so much. Maybe those things don't exist.
Not just accreditation, but also training and pretty much what is the competence criteria they have taken, the main contractor have taken. when they consider the specific subcontractor appointing him for their specific role and job.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Thanks, Buncher. Thanks for sharing. Paul.
In regards document naming, should we be dictating to the contractor how we want those information recorded? So we want this listed as this document with these codes, rather than here's your PDF for X92.
You definitely should be doing that, Paul. Yeah. So what I was going to say, Pencho, is that document that you've shown me is one that John Morrow shared with me a much earlier version a few years ago, and it was one of the best I came across, actually. I think you've done I'm sure that's even better now. But what I would say is the problem is that you provide those documents, and David will provide documents, and Camden will provide documents, and the difficulty is that the contractors, and it's not just the contractors, but it's their supply chain, they probably won't read them.
Yeah.
Now, and if they read them, they won't have the bandwidth to interpret them.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what I think, there's two things that I'm suggesting. One is that rather than Origin, Notting Hill and Camden all having different sets of requirements of their supply chain, why don't we come up with something that's standardized in terms of requirements?
Yeah.
Because that would make it a lot easier for the main contractors, and the main contractors can then make sure that their subcontractors are all providing the information, and we've got an opportunity to make it properly machine readable. If we've got it properly machine readable, we don't need to be manually checking things. So that's what I think. We've got an opportunity, and I know I'm jumping across to the BIM task group, to the Golden Thread task group now, but I think that's something that the Golden Thread task group could help landlords and main contractors actually put together.
Can I just add on this? It's not just giving the right tools, it's also giving it to the right people. So for example, machine readable format is the person who actually submit all the documents. They also need to be educated. They also need to be trained. And
Well, I've got an answer to that, actually, Pancho. We've been working for years. In fact, David may have come across them before, but with the Supply Chain Sustainability School, they've been interested in what we're doing in BIM4Housing for several years now. It's an organization that I came across about 3 or 4 years ago, and they're actually they're funded by the CITB, and they are controlled by all the big contractors and clients as well. And the key thing is that they provide free training to SMEs.
Okay.
Now, given that the majority of the people that are actually producing this information seem to be SMEs below 250 employees, I think that's a really interesting point. So I've been talking with the Supply Chain Sustainability School about them putting together some training courses that can support exactly what we need. So I'm hoping that I did a pitch to them last week to get them to do it, because obviously we've got no money. BIM4Housing's, just we're all volunteers. But if we can leverage if we become an audience for it and can suggest this to contractors as well, because contractors are keen. Because everybody at the moment is exposed, because everybody's having to do things uniquely.
Making a contractual, actually, not suggesting, but putting that in the specification in our ERs to specific training. I think that if there is a specific training for that, that would be ideal.
Yeah, that's an interesting one, isn't it? Because the point that you were making earlier, somebody was making about competency. That's a really good way of doing it.
We already do it for fire doors, for example, or fire stopping. We have specific requirements and schemes, third-party schemes that we wish contractors to be using. Why don't we actually put that as an additional, training and competency of whoever will be dealing with data?
Yeah, no, good thinking. Edward, you're on mute, my friend.
Second time today, not doing well. Yeah, I just think for all of this, we're quite good at coming up with lists of what we want. I think we've got a pretty good list of what we want that we use at Origin. It's very detailed, but we still struggle at times to get things on that list. I think you'd agree, Pensha. And I think that there's the other side of this, which is the sort of policy and procedure that goes along with it. And we need to get better at detailing the regulatory drivers for this, the reasons why we need it, who is going to be responsible at different stages, the timescales. A lot of our contracts at the moment are saying, this information's got to be provided 10 weeks out, 6 weeks out from completion. From a point of view of creating a safety case report, we'd probably want that information at the same time the building safety regulators getting it at Gateway 2. Because if things aren't going to change significantly, we could start building our safety case based on that information from that point. And then, of course, we're made aware of any changes, we can make the alterations. That would take a lot of stress out of the project, because we could deal with issues as they come up rather than discovering the problems a few weeks out from handover and going, that's going to be an operational nightmare. What can we do about it? We can design things out before they become a problem. So I think whatever we do on this, we need to look at that policy and procedure, because I think actually we're getting very close to having that definitive list of what we want as information. It's just how we receive that information and who's responsible for it.
Yeah.
And how you check it.
Yeah.
Because I think if people know that you're checking, Ed, then they're more likely to respond properly. If they don't think that you're checking, then people will naturally not bother.
Yeah, and that's perhaps where the sort of machine readable documents is useful. We for argument's sake, we might have received certification documents for an electrical system.
Yeah.
Interestingly, when you look at it, you realise the date of maybe, just for argument's sake, the design document has a date that is after the install date, and that does make you wonder what's been going on there.
Yeah. No,
but we've come across stuff recently on a project, and the status was status C, and I looked that up, and it says it's rejected.
and no one's done anything about it.
Yeah.
Brian.
Yeah, I was just going to sort of, I mean, this is a great discussion. And in terms of actually handover, I think in Camden, I think part of the problem is we've got nobody on the client side who is what we call the information asset owner. So who's responsible for this data when you get it back from your main contractor? And if you've got someone responsible, that will put greater onus on that information asset owner to ensure they're getting the right data, the right quantity, the right format, so we have got sufficient data coming through from the main contractor. If nobody's responsible on the client side, if nobody's responsible for that ownership, then obviously there's less imperative to actually ensure it's done properly. And that's the whole idea of information assets owner. Ultimately, they're responsible for that data.
Yeah, and that's interesting, Brian. Our asset management organization has changed beyond recognition over the last couple of years, for a whole bunch of reasons, but building safety being just one of them. And we have an asset data team, but they're probably not as well connected to the kind of development process as they should be. So kind of playing to what was said before in terms of starting with the end in mind. You know, we really need the end users of this information to be at the table defining or helping us to define exactly what is needed.
Absolutely, David. Yeah.
I think the other challenge, David, is that you just used the term asset management.
I did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now,
Was that wrong?
no, not at all. No, but in when I first got involved in residential, probably 7 or 8 years ago, I've come from a world of asset management.
Yeah.
And what you call asset management isn't what the rest of the world calls asset management. In most cases, asset management in housing associations and councils is life cycle replacement.
Well, plus compliance. There's a lot of compliance management goes on in asset management now.
But not planned maintenance.
That's a good question. I mean, definitely not day-to-day repairs. That's separate. Planned replacement strategy, definitely. Planned maintenance, good question. No, do you know, I think planned maintenance is actually part of our asset management function now, and that's
Okay.
where our
But it
asset
should
management
be.
function has changed.
Yeah, it should be part of it, but
Yeah,
I
it
just
is.
want to mention that.
Yeah. No, thanks. Okay. Really, as always, we have really interesting conversations at these sessions with lots of kind of good input. It feels like we've got a proposal on the table, which is, if we're going to move this forward, there's value in us moving it forward collectively. There's no point of us all disappearing into our own corners and reinventing the wheel every time. It seems, George, there's a suggestion that this is very aligned with what the Golden Thread team is doing.
Yeah.
So there seems to be some value in kind of aligning ourselves with that particular work stream. On a practical level, how best to move that forward? How can we do that, do you think?
Well, there's a number of people in this meeting who are also part of the Golden Thread Task Force.
Right.
So I think that's a bridge to achieve that. What
Okay.
we're trying to do at the moment is to do two things. Oh, Chris has got a hand up.
So I'll let you finish first, George.
Yeah.
No,
So
in.
So what I think would be useful is if we can, we'll try and determine within the work in the task force to come up with a set of base level requirements that everybody, because I've also been talking with the Fire Industry Association and all the federations and the NFCC, because what I thought would be important is to get everybody's buy-in to the basic level. Every time anybody looks at what I've suggested, they say, well, yeah, but what about this and what about that and what about that, like Brian did earlier.
Yeah.
Absolutely right. But what we want to do is try and make it as simple as possible so it becomes a no-brainer. You know, if you're installing something, we want to know where you've installed it.
Yeah.
We want to know the manufacturer's model number. We want a record of, who did the commissioning.
Yeah.
If it needs commissioning. So I think if we can do that and then run it past the group here, and if you're interested in doing what David's saying there, you feel that your organization would be willing to join a more collective, we're not asking for any money, but if you think that they'd be interested, if you put maybe just drop your name, drop that in the chat, that a standard set of requirements. Is that a good way of doing it? If you just put
that in the chat, and then that's you putting your hand up saying, yeah, this is something I'd like to be involved in.
Yeah, exactly. What we've
Right.
also
Wait.
sorry,
Just
Richard.
put in the chat standard. You
Yeah.
don't have to write standard set of requirements. Just put standard and we'll pick it up.
Thanks
Let's
for
make it
thanks for
easy.
pulling us back there, Richard. I knew you
Sorry,
were
but it
listening.
just needed to be done just occasionally, Dave.
I knew you were here for a reason.
I wish somebody had told me.
No, that's really helpful. Okay.
The other thing I would say, David, just as a mention, we did a survey a couple of weeks ago of in the BIM and asset management meeting, and it came up with some quite interesting and surprising results. Not hugely surprising to me, to be honest, but I think a lot of people were surprised. So, I'm very happy to share with you the results of that. But it basically talked about, whether people's expectations, for example, in terms of Regulation 38, I know that we keep banging on about it, but the way I'm looking at it is it's like a canary in the mine.
Yeah.
Because if after all the bashing that the industry's had, if they still can't get the Regulation 38 stuff right, the structural stuff doesn't stand a chance. So if you're interested, just put survey report or survey, sorry, Richard, in the chat and we'll send it to you.
Right. So structural. No, standard. It was standard. That's the word.
Standard. Yeah.
Standard if you want to get involved in the golden thread stuff.
Yeah.
And now I've forgotten the word that you used there, George.
Survey.
Survey. That's it. Standard or survey. There you go. I knew it would come back to me. Okay, Chris, you've patiently had your hand up for a little while.
Yeah, I thought somebody took it down. I don't remember. But I'm going back to a point on data collection, to be honest. So again, with all the spreadsheets that you've seen, it's everything all together, all at once. Whereas perhaps some thought needs to be given around your main contractors to say that you have got to have some software which potentially hand scanners or something, so that when they employ their subcontractors, that they can actually get a hand scanner to say, oh, I've logged into this scanner, it's in, I'm going to scan its product number, because I'm scanning it, I'm saying I've installed it. But again, it's going back, if you can collect your data at the point of entry, then your data quality is going to be far better. So would it perhaps not be better to sort of think in future, well, the best way to coordinate is when you have your main contractors, the stipulation is they need to collect that data at the point of contact. If they need to get hand scanners, which they lend to subcontractors, then shit, fine. But then you as a client have got it, and potentially you as a client could see this system. Potentially it could flag up that somebody's installed the wrong bit of the wrong door or something. I don't know. I know you don't want to scan absolutely everything. So obviously if they've got assemblies which will represent a fire door and everything around it, and that's certified, then that should potentially do it. But it opens up the opportunity that you'll start seeing what products in there, and then they've got it. The other point on that, because I've been looking at a book on data warehouse, and once I saw a Snowflake demo where they almost have data verses. So where you were talking about different requirements from different people, so your product requirements, Camden's requirements, North Genesis, whatever. But potentially your main contractor could maintain that, so they would put the requirements up, but then almost you've got a data warehouse where they'll transform to say this is actually supposed to match the requirements from Camden. This is actually supposed to match. So essentially they've almost got a system which is holding it centrally, but it enriches the data when they get the different thing from either their subcontractors or from requirements from the client. So it's only because I've seen these three different things that I've put together. But the first thing I'd say is try and get your data collected when it's installed, because you potentially can get so much in there just having sort of the part number, where the location is. So you could specify once it's installed, you scan the product, you scan the space, and then afterwards you can do whatever you like with it. You can link the product, you can get your zones together, say I want to know what this zone is. So talking about your fire zones, you could say I wanted to find fire zone A, which is space A, B, C, D. But if you collected everything up front, which says this object is installed here, then you've immediately got that relationship built up with the space and all the products around it. Then you can create your systems, and you can create your zones and do your manipulation after. But the sort of but yeah, looking at a spreadsheet once everything's installed, and then somebody's had to type it in. So collect it at the off point and get them to say this is what people have got to collect. Then you don't have to fill in a spreadsheet too much.
Yeah, Chris, I've done a lot of work in this area, and one of the challenges is making sure that we don't end up with dozens of different feeds of information from mobile apps, each of which has been done for a particular purpose. So I agree with you completely, but the process needs to start before they go to site, so that the information is collected against a known space and also ideally a known asset. So when people are doing the inspections, then if they're using over a period of time, they'll be using different software applications to do the inspection. It's critical that it's referenced back to that unique asset, because otherwise it's a nightmare to try and pull together. I mean, we're trying to do it at the moment with fire stopping, and every single they've used a mobile app to do that, to inspect the fire stopping, and it's really detailed. The problem is that it creates a unique floor plan for every single fire stopping asset. So in this particular project, which isn't a big project, it's got 1,300 fire stopping records that have been captured on a mobile tool, and every single one has got its own floor plan.
Wow.
So
I think I understand that's a challenge, but if you had almost your central record of your assets, then again,
definitely
if you potentially feed out to your subcontractors what it is, it doesn't necessarily mean they might be able to create a completely different ID, as long as they, when they return it to you, they marry it back to the asset you were talking about. So again, it's saying this links with this asset, and then you've got that chain back. Oh, I'll try and look up. I don't know. It was an excellent seminar on Snowflake to do with media, or not media, retail. But they had a dataverse where it was, you could do your interrogation of the data, but everyone who put data in that area had a specific remit to do. But after that, you could do it. I don't know, it was a couple of years ago, but I was thinking, oh, now I understand what the dataverse is. But but each of these separate parties would almost, I don't know if it's a Snowflake thing, and I don't work for them either, but they had the data available, but then they could actually manipulate it and pull it together. And when you wanted to get your stats, you would go to whichever sources, and it was somehow magically linked. So sorry, I'll go back into non-technical. I don't know how it was linked.
Yeah, Chris, we need an interpreter on this call next time, if that's okay. for the non-techs amongst us. But thank you for sharing. I mean, that again seems, I mean, it sounds like a really good idea, because I think what you're basically saying is you kind of push the digital solution further back into the supply chain. So if you collect the information digitally in the first place, you've got a much one, it generates the data much quicker, and you got much more opportunity to do something with it downstream.
Definitely.
In essence, so it seems to be what's being said. But no, thanks for sharing that, Chris. Okay, so we've got a bit of a plan. So we connect with the Golden Thread people, and those that have said standard can get involved in that. And I can't now remember what survey was all about. My mind is awash at the moment.
It's the survey that we did at the
asset management.
Basically, yeah.
Okay. So I think this has been a really good conversation. I think it's really interesting to kind of see the potential end goal, but also understand where people potentially are in the journey and the steps that need to be taken. I think it's great that we've agreed that we probably need to collaborate around this to get some consistency and some standardization into it, and that seems like a good step. As with all of these sessions, it isn't about necessarily deciding what the solutions are, but I think there's a sense of community. There's a sense of, we're all in this together. We're all trying to achieve the same stuff here, and if we can do it together, then there's more value in that. George.
I was just going to say, I think we may have come across a new undocumented feature in Teams, because when I was on the call this morning, I put my hand up and then I found that it had been taken down. And Victoria Finn put in the notes that she'd had exactly that same experience. And
Okay.
Chris, you said that as well earlier as well, didn't you? So
yeah, I was waiting patiently, and I thought, did I just unmute myself, or did I put my hand down as well? I wasn't sure, so then I stuck it up again.
There's just another glitch in Teams, and believe me, there are many.
Maybe there's a limited number of times you can put your hand up.
Oh,
maybe.
Cool.
Sorry,
that
George.
would be good. That would be good.
Sorry, George. I just put your hand down.
Right. Running out of time, guys. Coming to the end of our hour and a half. Hopefully people have found it useful. Hopefully people have found it interesting. Thanks to everyone that's contributed. Just and I say this every time. But in terms of the topics that we talk about, if there are things that you think there would be value in discussing in this sort of forum, then please let George or myself or Richard know, and we happily, put those items on the agenda. We can kind of enrich the conversations with the things that you want to talk about. But it sounds like we've got some good thoughts. Sounds like we've got a way forward. So unless anyone's got anything they would like to add at the end, except George, he's put his hand up too much, then I'm going to draw us to a close. Richard, have you got anything to add?
No. Okay? I was just coming on to say goodbye.
All right. Okay. Well, yeah. No. Lovely to see you all again, and hope to see you again in the near future.
Brilliant. Thank you, David. Thanks for
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers, guys.
Thanks all.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thanks.